Hello everyone, my name is Yara and today I'm going to be recommending books based on Marvel movies. I even got my Marvel shirt to be festive. So I was reflecting a bit on the Marvel movie franchise, and this franchise has been a part of people's lives for so many years. Like Endgame was 11 years coming. 11 years! That's a long time. It's more than half of my entire lifetime. And so I thought it would be cool if I found some books that in my mind were similar to the Marvel movies. Not necessarily in terms of plot or even style a lot of times. It's more about like what these movies talked about, what they tackled, and why they were so successful. So if you like Marvel and you like books, please continue watching. If you don't like Marvel, then these are still some pretty awesome books, so I would still recommend watching. Anyway, let's just get into it. So we're gonna start off with the OG, the man who started it all, Iron Man. So a lot of the Iron Man movies talk about, and honestly the concept of Iron Man itself, is how far technology can go and the advancements that we can do with it. But it also talks about how this technology, if in the wrong hands, could actually be detrimental to society, which we could see in Iron Man 1 when Stark Industries was funding bombs for the US government, or in Iron Man 2 when some maniac was building an army of robots that he could use for war. And so the book that I'd recommend for Iron Man is Scythe by Neil Shusterman. Scythe is a dystopian novel that takes place in a world that has essentially eradicated disease and eradicated death. There is no natural way to die, and even if you do die, there are ways to revive you. But obviously that causes issues in terms of population control. So there are people designated as scythes who can kill people, and if a scythe kills you, then you're done, you're dead. Now, being a scythe is the utmost revered position in this society, and our main characters, Rowan and Citra, are taken on as apprentices to become scythes. But as they learn what a scythe must do and their responsibilities, and the kind of inner workings of the scythedom, they realize that a lot of it is actually corrupt, and people have power that maybe shouldn't have power. This book really introduces so many philosophical debates and questions about technology and about just power in general and what people can do with it. And it's an awesome book and I highly recommend it. By the way, I'm going to try to go in the order in which these movies are released. Of course there are sequels and stuff, but I'm going by when the first movie was released. So the next one in order is Thor. So Thor is obviously based on Norse mythology. We see Odin and the Valkyries and all these mythological things. And so my recommendation is kind of obvious, but I recommend Magnus Chase and the Gods of Asgard by Rick Riordan. Rick Riordan, as you probably know, is the author of the Percy Jackson and the Olympian series, and that series deals with Greek gods, but this series deals with Norse gods. And in this book we follow Magnus Chase, who is an orphan who's been living homeless on the streets of Boston for 2 years at the point where we meet him. And one day he finds out that his uncle, who he hasn't seen since he was a baby, is trying to track him down. And through some wild circumstances, he finds out that he is the son of a Norse god. And he is taken to Asgard, and it's a lot of fun. A lot of fun stuff happens. Now, this recommendation is coming from personal experience in that I watched the Thor movies when it came out, so like a long time ago, long before this book came out. And I found the movie really entertaining, but I also wanted to know a little bit more about Norse mythology. And so Rick Riordan's got you covered. So we see all the same people that we see in the Thor movies, but this book dives way more into that and way more into the actual lore and the stories behind them, which I found completely fascinating. And I actually found that when I watched the later Thor movies after having read this series, I enjoyed them a lot more because I could understand those little references that most people probably wouldn't understand because Norse mythology is not that commonly known. And just like Thor Ragnarok, this series has so much humor and goofiness and just fun mixed in with those serious elements and epic battles. So yeah, I really like this series and I think more people should read it. So next we have Captain America. While all the Marvel movies to some extent deal with politics, Captain America movies is where they really pin it down and really discuss the political implications and the relationships between superheroes and the government. And the conception of Captain America himself was just as a ploy during World War I to kind of have a mascot for America and to give people hope during the war. And in later Captain America movies, he's coming to terms with the fact that the organizations that he was the figurehead of, that he supported, are not necessarily as morally sound as he thought they were. And what first came to mind when I thought of this kind of discussion was The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. And I think this series, and especially Mockingjay, showcase how both sides of this war were using Katniss as a figurehead and pretty much as a face of the revolution to promote their agenda, when in reality both were kind of corrupt. However, almost everyone and their mother has either read or seen The Hunger Games, so I wanted to recommend something a little less known. And so I went with The Darkest Minds by Alexandra Bracken. Now this was really popular on BookTube a few years ago, but I think the hype has kind of died down now. But I really wanted to come back because I love this series. This book takes place a few years after a disease swept across America and killed a majority of the population of children. However, what's more interesting is that the children who survived developed superpowers. And these powers come in the form of intelligence, telekinesis, controlling electricity, controlling fire, and controlling minds. And our main character is of the latter. She can control minds. To try to control the situation, the government ordered the construction of these rehabilitation camps to try to fix these kids, but in reality, these are pretty much concentration camps. We follow our main character Ruby and her group of friends as they try to escape and find a safe haven for kids like them. And the reason I'm recommending this in accordance with Captain America is because I think it has a lot of the same discussions about political affiliations, not in terms of like parties, but you know, like in terms of the government and whose side you're on. These kids learn really early on that honestly, no one is truly on their side. They're either going to be harmed or they're going to be used. And finding a balance between what will give them the most agency to help themselves is something that is talked about throughout the series. And something that I also wanted to mention is that in Civil War, obviously there's a lot of discussion of the consequences of what the Avengers did in the past and the destruction they may have caused. And that's something that I really like to see in stories, is when people talk about the consequences of doing certain things. And this story does that very well. Like, there is a price to pay for what people have done, and exploring that as well as the psychological consequences was something that I thought was super refreshing in the YA genre. And I just love this book. I think it's brilliant. So next we have Guardians of the Galaxy. So the story basically follows a guy named Peter Quill who becomes the target of a lot of space bounty hunters because he steals an immensely powerful orb from a guy named Ronan. And to help evade these bounty hunters, he enlists the help of a lot of morally ambiguous criminal outlaws. I think you know where I'm going with this. Yes, indeed. Six of Crows. This has probably been shoved down your throat a million times on BookTube, but honestly, good riddance, because I will not rest until the entire world has read Six of Crows. That was a little dramatic. But seriously, I think a lot of the success of Guardians of the Galaxy was due to the fact that it centered characters that were, one, not really known, and two, not our typical heroes. They are people put in crappy situations who learn to deal with it. And I think that describes Six of Crows very much. We follow a group of characters who are all living in a city called Ketterdam. One of our protagonists, Kaz Brecker, is leader of a gang called the Dregs, and one day he is tasked with an impossible heist that would give them a lot of money. And so he enlists 5 other people who are also very morally ambiguous but very skilled, and they try to pull off this massive heist. And just like Guardians, these aren't our typical YA heroes, but I think because of that, that's what makes them so engaging. They are so complex, they have so many different motivations. Like, we follow 5 POVs in this book and then 6 in the next book, and each one is so beautifully crafted. This series melds plot and characters so well because the plot is immensely intriguing and I really love learning about the heist and their schemes. But in the end, I absolutely love these characters. They are so ingrained in my heart, I would die for them. Again, I'm being dramatic, but that's what this series does to me. I love it. And next we have SpiderMan Homecoming. So out of all the Marvel movies, SpiderMan Homecoming is the most coming-of-age film. When we meet Peter Parker, he is already established as Spider-Man, and so SpiderMan Homecoming deals more with the idea and the responsibilities of being a superhero and dealing with normal life after having gone through so many adventures, you know, with the Avengers. And so the recommendation I had for this was The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. This may seem kind of strange, but bear with me. I can prove it. So The Poet X tells a story of an Afro-Latina girl named Xiomara who is living in Harlem in a very conservative religious household. It talks about her trying to figure out who she is and what she wants to be in terms of her sexuality, in terms of religion, her faith. And a lot of this exploration comes in the form of her poetry, which I interpreted to kind of be like her superpower. You see where I'm going? She decides to join her school's slam poetry club, and there she feels so at home. She feels like these people understand her and that her voice can be heard. But then at the end of the day, she does have to go back home where she feels like she's being silenced. So I think this struggle of having this talent, having this ability, but having to hold back is something that is illustrated in both this book and in SpiderMan Homecoming. I will say this is definitely not as fun as SpiderMan Homecoming. There's a lot of sad, emotional moments here, but they are both beautiful coming-of-age stories and really, really enjoyable. Next we have Black Panther. Now, Black Panther was a smashing hit across the world, and I think it was because of its very unique story that it was telling. It was still a superhero story, it was still kind of an origin story of Black Panther and who he wanted to be, but it also brought up discussions regarding colonialism and race in America. And so for this, I'm recommending The Hate U Give by Angie Thomas. This is a story about a girl named Star Carter who one night bears witness to a police shooting that results in the death of her friend, Khalil. And as with a lot of police shootings in America, there are some people who believe that this was justified and some people who believe that it wasn't. And Star has to navigate her life after this traumatic experience, knowing that Khalil was innocent, but being afraid to speak up. And something that I thought was really brilliantly discussed in this novel was actually the inspiration behind the title, The Hate U Give. The full quote was a Tupac quote, and it's, "The hate you give little infants fucks everybody." And pretty much that's talking about how the country and the criminal justice system has failed Black youth in America and is continuing to fail Black youth in America. And what's interesting is that that theme fits into Killmonger's story. We learn that he was neglected not only by Wakanda, but also by America, where he was sent to, and that had a lot to do with the motivation of his actions. I think both The Hate U Give and Black Panther offer really interesting discussions and really interesting perspectives about these kind of topics and are highly important to our society. So yes, I would highly recommend reading The Hate U Give. The next Marvel movie is Captain Marvel. So for this recommendation, I'm kind of cheating a little bit because I haven't actually finished the book that I'm going to recommend, but I read enough to know that it fits into this category, and that is Becoming by Michelle Obama. I'm about halfway through the book, and so far just reading about her upbringing, I've noticed a lot of similar themes to the Captain Marvel story. We see in Captain Marvel that Carol Danvers had to deal with a lot of people pushing her down growing up, not believing in her, thinking that she's too emotional, and her consistently defying those expectations. She becomes this super powerful superhero that is awesome and badass, and she uses her confidence and her power to show all the people that doubted her that she is capable of more than they think. In fact, more capable than many of the Marvel superheroes. And reading Michelle Obama's story really filled me with the same inspiration and drive that Captain Marvel's story did, because she had a lot of people telling her that because of where she lived and how she grew up and her being a woman of color, she could not surmount to the level of success that she wanted to. But no, she proved them wrong. She went to Princeton, went to Harvard Law, and became a lawyer, and worked to benefit her society. So if you want a really kick-ass female empowerment story like Captain Marvel, I check out Becoming by Michelle Obama. So technically I did skip this chronologically, but we will talk about it now, and that is The Avengers. Pretty much what this whole Marvel franchise sums up to. And the book series that I recommend for this is The Lunar Chronicles by Marissa Meyer. It has just now occurred to me that Marissa Meyer has written a series about superheroes, but I haven't read it, so we're gonna ignore that. The Lunar Chronicles is a sci-fi retelling of a lot of fairy tales. So the first one, Cinder, is a retelling of Cinderella. The second one, Scarlet, is a retelling of Little Red Riding Hood. The third one, Cress, is a retelling of Rapunzel. And the fourth one, Winter, is a retelling of Snow White. So as you can see, even in the structure of the series, it kind of mimics the Avengers franchise because each installment is kind of focused on one character until the very end, where we have this huge team-up epic battle thing. It's awesome. The Avengers is an action-packed, fun movie filled with all of your faves working together, and The Lunar Chronicles has that same vibe. We get to explore a whole cast of characters, as well as travel across Earth and even the moon. This series is really fast-paced and exciting. It has a lot of good relationships. One of my all-time favorite ships is in this series. And it culminates to a really satisfying end, in my opinion, which is what I think the Avengers franchise did for a lot of people. So those are all of my recommendations. If I missed a movie, it was probably because I couldn't think of a book for it. But if you have any recommendations that you think relate to Marvel movies, please let me know down below. A few months ago I made a similar kind of video with Disney movies and a lot of people enjoyed that. So if you want to see more of these kind of videos, please let me know. Like, comment, just talk to me. Anyways, thank you so much for watching and I'll see you later. Bye!